The call had come just after midnight, a clipped, almost dismissive tone on the other end, relaying the bare facts. Dr. Alistair Finch, celebrated historian, dead at Blackwood Manor. Accidental fall. Case closed. Almost. But they still needed me, just to tie up loose ends. That phrase always chafed. Loose ends were my specialty. The threads others overlooked. The microscopic narratives etched into bone and soil. My particular brand of forensic anthropology wasn't about closing cases. It was about opening them wider, peeling back layers until the truth, however inconvenient, lay exposed. The drive out to Blackwood Manor was a winding affair, the asphalt giving way to gravel, then eventually a rutted dirt track swallowed by ancient oaks. The estate loomed, a hulking silhouette against the pre-dawn sky, its Gothic Revival architecture a testament to centuries of accumulated history and, no doubt, secrets. I imagined Finch immersed in its archives, surrounded by the ghosts of forgotten narratives. A tragic fall, they said. I reserved judgment, as I always did. Gravity was a constant, but human intent was a variable I'd spent my career deciphering. A single patrol vehicle idled near the main entrance, its blue and red lights painting the rain-slicked stones in a slow, pulsing rhythm. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal scent that always sharpened my senses. The lead detective, a man whose face I vaguely recognized from a previous, equally complex case, met me at the imposing oak door. His name escaped me, but his weary expression was familiar. Seth, he greeted, his voice low. Thanks for coming. Didn't think they'd bother you for this one. They always bother me for this one, I reply, my gaze already sweeping the grand hall, noting the faint scent of old wood polish and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, clinging to the air. What's the official word? That fell from the top of the main staircase. Clean fall, head trauma, open and shut. We've secured the scene. He gestured vaguely towards the cavernous space beyond. His housekeeper found him this morning. I nodded, already processing the information, cross-referencing it with the subtle cues of the environment. The grand staircase dominated the hall, a dark, polished behemoth that ascended into the manor's upper reaches. At its foot, a dark stain on the Persian rug had been meticulously covered with a sheet, but its outline was still visible, an ominous Rorschach blot. Show me, I said, my voice quiet, already moving past him. The detective led me to the scene. I pulled on my gloves, the thin latex a second skin, and knelt beside the covered form. The crime scene photographer had already finished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone from his flesh. We think he's slipped, the detective offered, his voice lacking conviction. Maybe a late-night stumble. He was a scholar, spent most of his life hunched over texts, not exactly spry. I peeled back the sheet, my movements precise, deliberate. Dr. Alistair Finch lay sprawled, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, limbs splayed. My eyes, however, didn't linger on the obvious. I scanned the man's clothing, a tweed jacket, and a Scott, trousers of a sturdy, old-fashioned weave. No obvious tears or snags that would suggest a struggle. No defensive wounds on his exposed hand, though a detailed examination would confirm. My gaze drifted to the floor around him. The antique rug, thick and plush, had absorbed much of the impact, but I noted the subtle disturbance of its fibers, a pattern that didn't quite align with the simple, uncontrolled tumble. The dust, usually a reliable witness, seemed oddly sparse in certain areas, as if recently disturbed, then quickly settled. No significant scuff marks on the polished marble steps above, which surprised me. A fall from that height down those steps should have left more evidence of friction, of a body tumbling and scraping. I ran my gloved fingers along the edge of Finch's jacket, feeling the rough weave. Then I noticed it, embedded almost imperceptibly in the fabric near his shoulder, a tiny fragment, barely visible. Not wood, not plaster from the manor walls. It looked synthetic, an anachronism, a discordant note in this symphony of antiquity. My brow furrowed. Anything else found? I asked, not looking up. Just Finch, the detective said, a hint of impatience in his tone. And his research materials. Books, scrolls, the usual. I spent another 20 minutes meticulously examining the body, noting the precise angle of the skull fracture, the subtle lividity patterns, the lack of significant bruising on his forearms. Everything pointed to a fall, yes, but a very specific kind of fall. One that felt orchestrated, driven by an instinct I'd learned to trust implicitly. I stood and began to widen my search, ignoring the detective's sigh. My eyes traced the path of the theoretical fall from the landing above. There, on the ornately carved banister, a faint, almost invisible scratch. Too clean for a clumsy grab, too deliberate. My attention was drawn to a heavy tapestry hanging on the wall adjacent to the staircase landing, depicting a medieval hunting scene. It seemed out of place even for a manor steeped in history, its colors unusually vibrant, its weave suspiciously tight. I reached out, my fingers testing the fabric, and felt a subtle give, not the plaster wall behind it. I tugged gently at a corner, and with a soft thwack, A section of the tapestries swung inward, revealing a narrow, concealed passage. Dust motes danced in the beam of my tactical flashlight as I stepped inside. The air grew immediately cooler, drier, carrying a faint electricum. The passage opened into a small, windowless room, starkly modern, a jarring contrast to the manor's ancient facade. My breath hitched. The hum was louder here, the faint, acrid smell I detected earlier now undeniable, a sharp tang of ozone and heated electronics. This was no historian's dusty archive. This was a secret, high-tech nerve center hidden within the very bones of Blackwood Manor, and Dr. Alistair Finch, the man of ancient texts, had clearly been connected to it. The tiny, synthetic fragment from his jacket now screamed its significance. An accident? I looked back at the covered body in the grand hall. No, this was not a simple fall. The tension in the air was no longer just about death. It was about something far more elaborate, far more dangerous. My work had just begun. My gloved fingers traced the cold, stiff line of the historian's jaw. The air in the study, thick with the scent of old paper and something metallic sweet, seemed to press in on me. I knelt beside the body, the floorboards groaning faintly under my weight, a silent protest against my intrusion. The detective, a broad-shouldered man with a perpetually furrowed brow, stood a respectful distance away, his impatience a palpable hum in the room. He'd given me the space I needed, but I knew the clock was ticking. It was a neat, linear break, consistent with a hard impact against the edge of the fireplace hearth, exactly where the body lay. But the kind of impact the force required felt off. I pulled out my magnifying loupe, a small, powerful lens I'd carried through countless investigations. Under its magnification, the bone revealed secrets the naked eye would miss. I spent another 10 minutes, slowly rotating the historian's head, examining the edges of the fracture. The bone itself was dense, typical for a man of his age, but what I saw next sent a prickle of unease down my spine. Along the inner margin of the main fracture, almost imperceptible, were a series of minute, almost hair-thin fissures. They radiated not from the point of primary impact, but from an adjacent area, a spot that, in a simple fall, wouldn't have sustained such concentrated stress. These weren't impact fractures from the fall itself. They were stress fractures, indicative of torsion or compression applied before the fatal blow, or at a very specific, unnatural angle during the impact. It was like seeing a ripple in water that didn't quite align with the stone that caused it. This wasn't just a fall, this was a forced, directed impact. The fall trajectory seemed complicated, I murmured, more to myself than to the detective. He grunted, a low rumble of acknowledgement. I moved my attention to the historian's clothing. His tweed jacket, usually a beacon of academic respectability, was rumpled and stained with dust and a faint, dark smear near the shoulder. I carefully unzipped my evidence kit, pulling out a set of specialized tweezers and sterile slides. Starting with the jacket, I meticulously combed through the fabric, looking for anything out of place. The local dust, a fine gray powder from the old plaster and wood, was everywhere, but my eyes quickly caught something else. Embedded deep within the weave of the tweed, particularly concentrated around the cuffs and the back of the collar, were tiny, iridescent particles. They shimmered faintly under my pen light, catching the light with a subtle metallic gleam. Not the dull glint of mica from granite, nor the earthy sparkle of quartz. This was something else entirely. I carefully plucked a few particles with my tweezers, depositing them onto a sterile slide. They were almost microscopic, a pale, silvery blue hue, unlike any mineral deposit I'd ever encountered in the manor or its sprawling grounds. I knew the geology of this region intimately. My work often involved connecting trace evidence to specific locales. This dust was a stranger here. It wasn't just foreign. It felt industrial, processed. The particles were too uniform, too crystalline to be natural erosion from stone. My mind immediately jumped to specialized environments, places where materials were handled with precision, perhaps even under controlled conditions. This wasn't a dusty library shelf or a muddy garden path. I continued my examination, working my way down the body. In the historian's right trouser pocket, my fingers brushed against something small, hard, and unexpectedly smooth. I carefully extracted it. It was a small, black, rectangular chip, no larger than my thumbnail, made of a dense, non-reflective composite material. One side bore a faint, almost invisible circuit pattern. It wasn't a keycard, not in the traditional sense, but it felt like an access token. And crucially, its surface bore the same silvery blue dust, clinging to the microscopic ridges of its texture. A jolt ran through me. This chip, this dust, they were connected, and they were alien to this estate. This wasn't just a staged fall. It was a murder carefully planned, and the victim had been somewhere else entirely before his end here. The implication was clear. The historian had a secret life, one that led him to places far removed from ancient manuscripts and dusty archives. My thoughts raced, trying to place the context of such a chip, such dust. The metallic sheen, The uniform particles, the precise circuitry. My mind conjured images of controlled environments, high-tech installations. That was it. The dust, the chip they fit. The historian, a man whose life revolved around the tangible past, had seemingly been involved with the intangible, the digital future, in a place designed for absolute security and secrecy. This man didn't just fall, I stated, my voice low, firm. I held up the chip, letting the detective see the faint shimmer of the foreign dust. He was somewhere else, doing something else, before he ended up here, and whatever it was, it left its mark. The detective stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the chip. The air in the study, already tense, now crackled with a new, dangerous energy. The meticulously crafted illusion of a tragic accident was crumbling, revealing a far more intricate and sinister truth beneath. I knew then that my meticulousness had not just uncovered a murder, but had unwittingly pulled me into the orbit of something much larger, something hidden, and potentially lethal. I knew then that my meticulous nature, often a solitary pursuit, was about to drag me into something far larger, far more dangerous than a simple forensic investigation. The chipped obsidian, the unnatural dust, these weren't just anomalies. They were carefully placed threads in a tapestry of deception. I carried the minuscule sample of dust, sealed in a sterile vial, to the forensic laboratory on the estate's periphery. The facility was small but well-equipped, a concession to the estate owner's desire for self-sufficiency and discretion. A sharp, almost metallic scent hung in the air, a blend of various reagents and sterilized surfaces. My colleague, a meticulous analytical chemist named Anya, looked up from a gas chromatograph, her brow furrowed in concentration. I need an elemental composition, I stated, placing the vial carefully on her bench. And quickly. This isn't standard particulate. Anya, accustomed to my cryptic requests, nodded, her dark eyes already assessing the tiny flecks. She moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the sample for analysis under the electron microscope, then through a mass spectrometer. The hum of the machinery filled the quiet room. I watched, my mind racing, replaying the scene in the study, the subtle signs I'd almost missed. The detective's earlier skepticism now felt like a distant echo. Hours later, the results were conclusive, yet baffling. Anya presented a detailed report, his voice hushed. It's an incredibly rare mineral composite, Seth. Primarily a form of cinnabar, but with traces of a silicate unique to a very specific geological formation. There are only a handful of known sites globally, and none of them are anywhere near this estate. She tapped a geographical plot on her screen. The closest match is an isolated region in the Balkans, known for ancient mining operations, long abandoned. The Balkans. Dr. Finch, the deceased historian, had been obsessed with ancient cultures, particularly those linked to forgotten trade routes. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just foul play. It was a crime steeped in history, reaching across continents. I spent the next 2 days immersed in Finch's digital archives, cross-referencing Anya's geological data with the historian's extensive research notes. Finch's publicly available work mentioned the Balkans, but his private files, accessible only through a labyrinth of encrypted directories, held a different story. There, nestled amongst obscure archaeological journals and topographical maps, I found it. References to a remote, unsanctioned archaeological dig site. The coordinates matched Anya's map precisely. Finch had been researching it, not as a purely academic pursuit, but with a fervent, almost desperate intensity. His notes hinted at a significant discovery, something lost to time, yet capable of reshaping it. My next step was clear. Find someone who knew Finch's recent movements. I tracked down his estranged research assistant, a young woman named Clara, living in a cramped apartment above a bustling market district. The air in her building smelled of stale spices and exhaust fumes. He opened the door, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear that transcended mere grief. Seth, I don't know what you want, she stammered, pulling me into the dimly lit living room, glancing nervously at the closed door. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. I need to understand Dr. Finch's last few months, Clara, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. Especially his work on the Balkan site, the one he never published. Her hands wrung together. He changed. After he found that old map, he became obsessed, not with academics. They'd meet in abandoned warehouses, or sometimes in the dead of night at some nondescript office building downtown. What kind of artifact? I pressed, my gaze unwavering. She shook her head, tears welling. He wouldn't say, just that it was bigger than anything, that it could rewrite history. He was afraid. Seth. He started encrypting everything, even his own thoughts. He mentioned digital ledger systems, untraceable transactions for ancient relics. The mention of digital ledgers clicked. I knew where my next lead would take me. The journey led me to the edge of the city, to an unassuming building that hummed with a low, constant thrum. Inside, It was a sterile labyrinth of cold air and blinking lights. The air was frigid, smelling faintly of ozone and static electricity. Rows upon rows of server racks stretched into the distance, their indicator lights a mesmerizing, silent symphony of green and amber. Each machine held untold secrets, terabytes of data, encrypted transactions. Finch, for all his academic pursuits, had delved into a world where ancient history intersected with modern finance, where priceless artifacts were traded not for cash, but for digital currencies in an untraceable network. The sheer scale of it was staggering. I ran a search using keywords Clara had provided, cross-referencing with Finch's encrypted notes. The results were slow, painstakingly encrypted and re-encrypted. This wasn't just a murder. It was an elaborate scheme, protected by layers of digital and physical security, and I was now caught in its center. The cold hum of the servers was a constant, almost physical presence in the data center aisle. Cold wallets and blinking servers, rows upon rows of machines, each a silent vault of information, glowed with an unsettling artificial light. My fingers, still numb from the chill, traced the outlines of the virtual ledger I'd accessed. Finch's final, desperate breadcrumb. Not just any antiquities, but objects tied to the very region where the historian met his end. The sheer scale was staggering, hinting at a deep-rooted operation, far beyond a simple opportunistic theft. This wasn't just about a tragic fall. It was about protecting a sprawling, illicit trade, and the historian had clearly stumbled too close to its core. My next step was clear. Back to the estate, specifically the dig site Finch had been so engrossed in. The journey back to the estate was quicker than I had anticipated. The early morning light painting the ancient stonework in muted golds and grays. I bypassed the main house, heading directly for the designated archaeological zone. The site, a sprawling grid of trenches and exposed foundations, looked undisturbed from a distance, but my training taught me to see beyond the obvious. I stepped over the low rope barrier, my boots crunching on loose gravel. It felt too quiet, too neat. Finch had been meticulously organized, but there was a subtle disarray here that didn't fit his character. I scanned the area, my gaze sweeping across the excavated sections. The official equipment, shovels, trowels, sieves were neatly stacked, covered by tarpaulins. But something else caught my eye. It yielded easily, softer than the compacted ground around it. This wasn't professional archaeological work. It was hurried, clumsy. I pulled a small hand trowel from my kit and began to carefully scrape away the top layer. Beneath the loose soil, I found faint impressions, the distinct pattern of a heavy boot, not the light-soled shoes Finch preferred for fieldwork. And then, a glint of muted color. I paused, heart thrumming a steady rhythm against my ribs. Gently, I brushed away more dirt, revealing a small, curved shard. It was pottery, no larger than my thumb, but its design was utterly anachronistic for this region and this period. The glaze, a deep, earthy red, and the intricate, geometric pattern were characteristic of a culture from a distant continent, thousands of miles away and centuries later than anything found on this estate. This wasn't a relic of the estate's history. It was a foreign object, recently placed, recently unearthed. This wasn't just about Finch's death. It was about what he found, what he knew. This fragment was evidence of illicit trade, a direct link to the obsidian hand. My phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion. It was the lead detective, his voice tight, lacking its usual cordiality. "Seth, we need to talk." My superiors are applying pressure. "About what?" I asked, still cradling the pottery shard. "The case. They're ready to close it." "Accidental fall. Open and shut." "That's not what the evidence suggests," I countered, my voice hardening. "I found things, detective. Things that point to foul play, to a much larger operation. Look, I understand your thoroughness, but we have to follow protocol. The official line is set. Unless you have something irrefutable, something immediate." His tone was final, dismissive. "I'll be back at my lab. I'll compile my findings." He sighed, a frustrated exhale. "Just be careful, Seth. Some doors are best left closed." The line went dead. The warning, thinly veiled, resonated in the quiet. Someone with significant influence wanted this buried. I carefully bagged the pottery shard, my determination hardening. Their pressure only confirmed my suspicions. I packed up my gear, the ominous feeling growing. Later that evening, the familiar comfort of my forensic lab was a welcome thought. The city lights twinkled outside my window as I drove, the day's discoveries replaying in my mind. The pottery shard, the digital ledger, the detective's forced compliance, it all coalesced into a disturbing picture. As I approached the lab, a subtle detail snagged my attention. The heavy oak door, usually secured with a triple lock system, seemed to be ever so slightly ajar. I parked, killed the engine, and sat for a moment listening. Nothing, just the distant city hum. I retrieved my flashlight and moved cautiously, my hand resting on the small, sturdy knife I always carried. The outer lock, a robust deadbolt, showed no obvious signs of forced entry, but the internal mechanism felt loose when I tested it. Someone had picked it. Pushing the door open slowly, I swept the beam of my flashlight across the main workspace. Nothing appeared out of place at first glance. No smashed equipment, no overturned cabinets. My personal desk, usually a controlled chaos of notes and reports, was too neat. A stack of files I'd left open, relating to Finch's initial findings, were now neatly closed and stacked. A half-eaten energy bar I'd left on the edge of my keyboard was gone. Nothing valuable was missing. No equipment stolen, no data corrupted. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. Someone had been here, in my sanctuary, observing, touching my things. They knew what I was working on. They knew I was closing in. I ran a hand over my face, the adrenaline coursing through me. The obsidian hand wasn't just a name in a digital ledger. It was a tangible threat, and they were watching. The pottery shard, cool and rough against my gloved palm, felt heavier than its minuscule size suggested. The detective's veiled warning echoed in my mind, a low thrum against the hum of the lab's ventilation system. Some doors are best left closed, he'd said, but the dust on my boots and the acrid smell of old stone still clinging to my jacket told me I'd already stepped through one. I placed the fragment under the stereo microscope, adjusting the focus until the intricate pattern swam into sharp relief. Or so it seemed. I spent hours meticulously documenting every minute detail, the subtle variations in glazed thickness, the minute inclusions within the clay body, the precise angles of the breaks. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate work, moved with practiced ease across the controls of the electron probe microanalyzer. The first hint of discord came from the microfractures. They were too clean, too uniform, lacking the organic, chaotic splintering I'd expect from a piece centuries old. Then, the clay composition. While superficially matching the known geological markers of the region, there were trace elements, minute quantities of modern industrial binders that simply shouldn't be there. I zoomed in further, pushing the magnification to its limits. Buried deep within a particularly fine line of the bird's wing, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a microscopic imperfection. A tiny, almost imperceptible air bubble, characteristic of modern firing techniques, not the ancient kilns Finch had described in his papers. A cold dread seeped into my bones, replacing my earlier frustration. This wasn't an authentic artifact. It was a forgery, and not just any forgery. This was a masterpiece of deception, designed to fool even the most seasoned expert. The precision, the attention to archaic detail, the subtle anachronisms. It spoke of a sophisticated operation, not a lone artisan. My understanding of Finch's death shifted violently. He hadn't just been researching ancient artifacts. He had been exposing a high-stakes forgery ring, an organization cunning enough to infiltrate the highest echelons of the antiquities market. He hadn't stumbled. He'd been silenced. The weight of that realization passed out on me, heavy and suffocating. Driven by a new urgency, I returned to the estate. The air inside was still and heavy, the scent of aged paper and leather clinging to everything. My gaze lingered on a heavy oak desk, its surface scarred with decades of use. I ran my fingers along the underside of the top drawer, feeling for any incongruity, any subtle give. There, a barely perceptible seam, almost flush with the grain. I pressed, and a small, shallow panel clicked inward, revealing a hidden compartment. My heart gave a sharp, involuntary lurch. Inside, nestled amongst velvet lining, were two items, a small, encrypted solid-state drive and a folded piece of parchment. I pulled out the parchment first. It was old, but not ancient, its edges crisp despite its age. Unfolding it carefully, I saw a map. It was a code, a puzzle, and it hummed with an arcane significance. Beside it, the drive blinked a tiny, almost imperceptible blue light. The encrypted files, the coded map. This was it. This was what Finch had been hiding, what he'd likely died for. The warning from the detective rang in my ears again, but this time, it was less a suggestion and more a confirmation of the danger I now face. I carefully secured both items. The information on that drive, combined with the map, could unravel everything. I needed to access the drive, and I needed to do it somewhere secure, away from prying eyes. My mind raced, settling on the only place I knew at that level of digital isolation. Hours later, the quiet hum of servers filled the air around me. I found the terminal I'd arranged to use, a standalone unit disconnected from the main network, a digital fortress. The screen flickered to life, demanding a password. I stared at the prompt, the weight of Finch's legacy and the unseen danger pressing down on me with every blinking cursor. But the dust on my boots and the acrid scent of ancient earth clinging to my clothes had already pulled me through, and there was no turning back. I had to know what lay behind the next one. Rows of silent, humming machines lined the corridor, their indicator lights a mesmerizing dance of green and amber, signaling the ceaseless flow of information. My own console, a formidable array of monitors and specialized input devices, hummed with a different purpose, awaiting my command. I settled into the worn ergonomic chair, the only concession to comfort in this stark environment. The glow of the screens cast my face in a pale, shifting light. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate work of bone and soil, moved with practiced precision across the customized keyboard. I inserted the historian's drive. The initial scan had confirmed a deeply layered encryption, designed not merely to protect, but too obscure to deter. It wasn't a simple lock, it was a labyrinth. I began with the coded map, a digital recreation of the parchment found hidden in the estate's library. The image, now magnified and enhanced, filled one of my screens. Symbols, intricate and archaic, formed a dense overlay on what appeared to be an old-world cartographic projection. My custom algorithms, honed over years of deciphering historical ciphers and digital anomalies, began their methodical work. I fed them known historical linguistic markers, geographical identifiers gleaned from the estate's archives, and even the unique stylistic quirks of the historian's previous works. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting patterns on the screens and the occasional, almost imperceptible click of a successful decryption attempt. My focus narrowed, an intense tunnel vision that blocked out the rhythmic thrum of the servers. I was searching for a pattern, a key. The pottery shard lay on a sterile pad beside my console, its surface scarred with minute, almost invisible etchings. I had photographed it under various light spectra, isolating faint symbols that might correspond. And then a flicker, a sequence of symbols on a digital map, initially dismissed as decorative flourish, suddenly resonated with the faint markings on the shard. It was a partial match, a fragmented key. I input the sequence, a calculated gamble. The algorithms churned faster, the progress bar on my main screen leaping forward. The dense overlay on the map began to peel back, revealing underlying text. Not a full translation, but fragments, tantalizing glimpses. Not just geographical points, but references to specific, often hidden, architectural features, a forgotten crypt beneath a Roman villa, a concealed chamber within an Elizabethan manor, a subterranean passage beneath a medieval fortress. Each location was annotated with a cryptic date, stretching back centuries. This wasn't just a map. It was a ledger, a timeline of clandestine activity. This wasn't about a single historian or a simple artifact. I switched my attention to the encrypted files, using the partial key derived from the map to attack the most heavily guarded directory. The process was agonizingly slow, a digital siege against layers of sophisticated obfuscation. Each failed attempt was a blunt reminder of the formidable forces at play. But I persisted, driven by the image of the historian's broken body and the quiet warning from the detective. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a cascade of green text flooded the screen, decryption successful. The files opened, revealing a trove of documents, correspondences, and ledger entries. My eyes scanned the text, the digital words blurring into a horrifying mosaic of ambition and control. The names I'd seen on the map reappeared, linked to financial transactions of staggering sums, the acquisition of historical properties, and most damningly, the discreet trade of artifacts, not forgeries, but genuine, priceless relics, described with a reverence that bordered on obsession. Then I saw the recurring phrases, the legacy and the keepers. The legacy, the documents explained in hushed, almost reverential tones, was not just a collection of artifacts, but a narrative, a secret history carefully curated and protected. It was the true version of events, supposedly shielded from public knowledge, its power derived from its exclusivity. Their purpose, to preserve the legacy and to subtly, yet profoundly, manipulate the public understanding of history. They didn't just trade artifacts. They controlled the very stories those artifacts told. He had been a threat, a loose thread in their meticulously woven tapestry of deception. He had likely stumbled upon their secret, perhaps intending to expose the manipulation of historical facts, and paid the ultimate price. It wasn't a fall, it was an execution, and the pottery shard, with its archaic symbols, was more than just a clue. It was a piece of their hidden legacy, perhaps a discarded element from one of their manipulated narratives, or a fragment of something the historian was trying to authenticate. I had opened a door, just as the detective had warned, and what lay beyond was not merely a criminal enterprise, but a vast, insidious conspiracy that sought to control the past itself. The blinking servers around me, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to pulse with a silent, watchful energy, as if the very air was listening. I was alone in this digital fortress, and I had just declared war on history itself. The weight of the old documents still pressed on my mind, a physical presence even after I'd carefully resecured them. The legacy, they called it, a true history, supposedly. The arrogance of it was almost as disturbing as the secrecy. Whoever had assembled this trove believed they held a monopoly on truth, carefully pruning the branches of public knowledge to suit their own design. My mind, however, kept circling back to the mineral dust, that unique, anachronistic fingerprint I'd found on the historian's clothes and in the subtle grooves of the ancient artifacts. My first thought was the historian's mentor, a retired curator known for his esoteric knowledge and an almost obsessive devotion to pre-colonial history. If anyone could shed light on these hushed references to the legacy or secret histories, it would be him. I found his address in a faded academic directory, a quiet residential street a few towns over. The curator's house was a monument to dusty scholarship, packed with books and artifacts that spilled from shelves onto every available surface. He was a small man, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose, his voice a reedy whisper that belied a sharp intellect. He offered me a weak tea, his eyes darting over my forensic kit bag, clearly uneasy. "Seth," he began, his voice barely audible above the hum of an ancient dehumidifier. "I heard about the historian. A tragic loss." "It was," I agreed, setting my teacup on a coaster that depicted a forgotten dynastic emblem. "But I'm not entirely convinced it was an accident. I've found some anomalies, and some documents that suggest a narrative beyond public record." I paused, letting my words hang in the air, watching for his reaction. His knuckles whitened as he gripped his own cup. "Anomalies?" he prompted, his gaze fixed on a distant point, as if recalling something unpleasant. "A specific mineral dust," I explained, leaning forward slightly. "Unique," and mentions of the legacy, a curated history protected from public knowledge. It sounded like something the historian might have been deeply involved in, given his research interests. He swallowed hard, his eyes finally meeting mine, a flicker of fear in their depths. The historian, he was always too curious for his own good. "You speak of protection. You speak of the keepers." The name hung in the air heavy and charged. "The keepers?" I echoed, my voice flat, betraying none of the sudden internal shift. "A society," he clarified, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "ancient, powerful. They don't just preserve history, Seth. They control it. They decide what the world sees, what it knows. Archaeological finds, especially those that challenge established narratives, they either vanish or are reinterpreted to fit their agenda. Political, financial, the motives are complex, but the power is absolute." The historian, he was investigating a major acquisition, something tied to a remote private estate that the keepers have had their eyes on for generations. A site rumored to hold artifacts that could rewrite entire chapters of our past. My mind raced, connecting his words to my evidence. "This mineral dust I found," I pressed, "it's distinctive. I've narrowed its probable origin to a specific geological formation, one that would indicate a very particular kind of site. Remote, untouched. Could it be linked to such a formation?" The curator hesitated, glancing nervously toward the window as if unseen eyes watched us. "The estate is in the old country far north, nestled within a unique geological anomaly, a place known for its ancient quarries, long since abandoned." He gave me a vague description of its location, a cluster of coordinates that I knew would take painstaking effort to pin down precisely. I thanked him, the words feeling inadequate for the bombshell he just dropped. He watched me leave, a look of profound resignation etched on his face. The curator's reluctant confirmation had not only validated my suspicions, but had also opened a door to a far more dangerous labyrinth than I'd anticipated. I wasn't just investigating a death anymore. I was delving into a conspiracy centuries in the making. I logged into a specialized terminal, accessing secure satellite imagery and geological survey databases, cross-referencing the curator's vague location description with my forensic data on the mineral dust. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up topographical maps, land ownership records, and historical surveys. The coordinates he'd given me, combined with the unique geological signature of the dust, finally converged on a single, unmistakable point. A private estate, vast and secluded, its digital footprint almost non-existent, nestled precisely within the geographical anomaly the curator had hinted at. The same anomaly that perfectly matched the unique mineral composition I'd identified. The Keepers, a powerful society, controlling history, tied to a remote estate. and a dead historian. The pieces clicked into place, forming a terrifyingly clear picture. The curator's words echoed, a chilling premonition of the journey ahead. The estates in the old country far north nestled within a unique geological anomaly. The drive north was a blur of increasingly desolate landscapes. The tarmac eventually dissolved into a gravel track, then a rutted dirt path that snaked through a dense, ancient forest. The estate, when it finally appeared, was less a single structure and more a sprawling complex carved into the very stone of the earth. High, formidable walls of rough-hewn granite rose from the ground, topped with discreetly placed surveillance globes that shivered faintly in the gathering twilight. I parked my borrowed vehicle a good 2 miles away, hidden beneath a canopy of gnarled oaks. The final approach was on foot, a slow, methodical trek through the undergrowth, my gear bag heavy on my shoulder. I moved like a ghost, relying on the skills honed over decades of delicate scene preservation and exfiltration from precarious locations. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant, decaying leaves. A faint hum vibrated through the ground, a low thrumming that suggested powerful machinery at work beneath the surface. My entry point, a service tunnel disguised as a natural rock fissure, was precisely where the curator had indicated. I moved through a labyrinth of concrete corridors, guided by faint emergency lighting and the occasional distant whir of ventilation fans. The hum intensified, leading me deeper. I found the forgery workshop tucked away in a sublevel, a vast, cavernous space that hummed with purpose. The air was thick with the distinct odor of solvents, fresh plaster, and something else, a musky, earthy smell I recognized as ancient stone. Workbench after workbench stretched across the floor, each laden with specialized tools, micro-chisels, precision grinders, custom-made brushes. Half-finished artifacts lay scattered about, some still wet with pigment, others undergoing meticulous aging processes. I saw the distinctive pale green pigment, identical to the trace I'd found on the historian's clothes, drying on a replica sarcophagus lid. Intricate clay tablets, mimicking Sumerian cuneiform, were being baked in industrial-grade kilns. The sheer scale and sophistication were breathtaking, a testament to Thorne's ambition and his contempt for legitimate history. This wasn't a small operation. It was an industrial-level deception machine. The workshop led to another, more heavily secured section. A massive, reinforced door, bristling with biometric scanners and pressure plates, stood sentinel. This was Thorne's inner sanctum. The locking mechanism gave way with a soft, almost imperceptible click. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was dry, climate-controlled, and utterly silent. I stepped into a wide, brightly lit space that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic thrum. This wasn't a vault in the traditional sense. It was a secure data facility integrated with a high-value storage area. Rows of sleek, black server racks lined one wall, their indicator lights blinking in a mesmerizing, silent chorus. The hum was louder here, a constant, electric murmur of information being processed and stored. Beyond the servers, behind thick, bulletproof glass display cases was the true treasure. Not forgeries, but genuine artifacts. My breath caught. A complete set of Roman silver, its intricate engravings gleaming under the spotlights. A pristine Egyptian funerary mask, its eyes seeming to follow me. Obsidian blades from Mesoamerica, their edges still impossibly sharp. And then, the centerpieces, 3 large, perfectly preserved scrolls, their papyrus brittle with age, held within airtight, inert gas chambers. They bore the unmistakable script of an ancient, forgotten language, the very script I had seen fragments of in the historian's study. This wasn't merely illicit trade. It was systematic plunder, a grand theft of human heritage. A sudden, sharp ping sliced through the quiet hum of the servers. Then another, closer. A red light, previously dormant, began to flash rapidly on a panel near the vault's entrance. My internal alarm bells screamed. I had been detected. The advanced security systems designed to protect Thorne's illicit empire were now fully aware of my presence. The air pressure in the room shifted almost imperceptibly as heavy blast doors began to slide shut in the main corridor outside. Footsteps, heavy and fast, echoed down the passage I had used to enter. I had mere seconds. I grabbed a small, intricately carved jade pendant from an open display, a genuine piece, small enough to conceal a tangible piece of evidence. I dove through the closing blast doors, the roar of hydraulics filling the corridor. The air rushed past me, hot with the friction of the closing metal. I hit the floor hard, rolling just as the doors slammed shut with a deafening clang, shaking the very foundations of the complex. The impact sent a jolt up my spine, but the adrenaline surging through me masked the pain. I was out, but not yet free. The hunt was on. The hum of the machines was a constant, low thrum against my temples, a mechanical heartbeat in the sterile quiet. Rows of indicator lights pulsed with an indifferent rhythm, green and amber, a digital forest where secrets were stored, not unearthed. The photographic evidence from Thorne's estate sprawled across the triple monitors. Wide-angle shots of the desolate landscape, close-ups of the quarry's jagged entrance, and the meticulous grid I'd laid out at the scene of Finch's death. I zoomed in on a specific rock face near where Finch had fallen, the pattern of fracture lines mirroring a distinctive geological fault I'd observed in the quarry. Below it, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, were faint, repetitive striations. Tool marks, not from the fall itself, but from something deliberately applied, perhaps to loosen a foothold or to create the appearance of an accident. I cross-referenced these marks with the images I'd taken of Thorne's private collection, focusing on a display case filled with geological survey tools and antique mining equipment. There, nestled amongst picks and chisels, was a specialized rock hammer, its head bearing a unique, slightly blunted edge. I rotated the image, aligning the hammer's profile with the striations on the rock face. A perfect match. The pattern, the width, the depth. It was undeniable. Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon a convenient accident. He had orchestrated it. My gaze flickered to the trace evidence reports, the microscopic analysis of the soil samples from Finch's clothing and the soles of his boots. The report detailed an unusual mineral composition, rich in specific silicates and iron oxides, unique to the ancient quarries near Thorne's estate. It wasn't just the type of soil, but the density of it, packed into the crevices of Finch's footwear, consistent with someone having spent considerable time traversing that specific terrain, not merely passing through. And then there were the flora microfragments, spores and pollen grains from a rare, hardy moss that thrived only in the sheltered, damp pockets of those very quarries. Finch hadn't just been at the estate, he had been in the quarries, likely led there, or perhaps forced. The next set of files were even more damning. My initial examination of Finch's remains had revealed minute, almost invisible abrasions on his wrists and ankles. Not deep enough to break the skin, but consistent with some form of restraint. The medical examiner, initially dismissing them as post-mortem bruising from the fall, had been persuaded by my insistence to re-examine the tissue under higher magnification. The report now confirmed microtrauma, indicative of pressure applied before death. I overlaid images of these abrasions with photographs of the antique leather straps I'd found in a forgotten chest in Thorne's study, ostensibly for binding rare texts. The width and texture were consistent. The implication was chilling. Finch had been subdued, then taken to the quarry. The Keeper's conspiracy, the curator's hushed words, the ancient artifacts, the hidden legacy. I pulled up the schematics of Thorne's estate, cross-referencing them with historical maps of the region. The estate wasn't just near the quarries. It was built directly on a network of tunnels and subterranean chambers that had once served as storage for mine materials. And within these chambers, I'd found faint, almost faded carvings on the rock walls, symbols that mirrored the iconography etched into the base of the unique statuettes from Thorne's private collection. Artifacts whose provenance had been deliberately obscured. Finch had been investigating this. Thorne, as a prominent historian and owner of the estate, was not just a collector. He was a guardian, a gatekeeper. The final piece slotted into place with a sickening thud. A digital scan of a small, discreet ledger I'd found hidden in Thorne's study, disguised as a historical journal. It detailed shipments, not of legitimate antiquities, but of raw, uncatalogued archaeological finds. Dates, weights, and coded references to specific depositories. The last entry, dated just days before Finch's death, listed a significant quantity of quarry stone, unique composition, destined for a new vault. A new vault. The curator's words about the unique geological anomaly and the earth holding secrets. The anomaly wasn't just a natural formation, it was a cover. A place where the keepers could stash their illicit gains away from prying eyes. Finch had discovered the vault, and Thorne had silenced him. My jaw tightened. Every piece of evidence, every minute detail, now wove into an undeniable tapestry of murder and systematic deception. Thorne hadn't just killed Finch, he had protected a vast, illicit network, and I had the proof. The adrenaline coursed through me, a bitter taste in my mouth. I had built an unassailable case, a forensic narrative so tight, so detailed, it would be impossible to refute. But the curator had also warned me about the reach of the keepers, their influence within established institutions. The police force, the very authority I was about to approach, could be compromised. My life, I knew, was no longer just at risk. It was forfeit the moment I exposed this. My own treasure was the truth, meticulously gathered, now ready to be unleashed. I couldn't trust everyone, but I had to trust someone. I secured the files, encrypting them, making multiple backups, sending an anonymized copy to a dead drop I'd set up years ago. A digital contingency plan for a scenario I'd always hoped would remain theoretical. I would present my findings. I would expose Thorne and the Keepers, and I would do it knowing that the hunt, which had begun with Finch's death, would now turn its full deadly attention to me. The game had just begun. Rows of indicator lights blinked a hypnotic rhythm. Each green flash a tiny victory. Each red one a minor setback in the data stream I was sifting through. The breakthrough came not with a dramatic chime, but a subtle shift in the data pattern. A series of seemingly innocuous transactions, routed through shell companies and offshore accounts, suddenly converged. They weren't just financial. Attached to these ledgers, buried deep within layers of obfuscation, were manifest detailed inventories of ancient artifacts. Not just generic descriptions, but specific provements, dates of acquisition, and most damningly, the names of the original researchers who cataloged them before their disappearance from various archaeological sites. Dr. Finch's name appeared repeatedly, linked to the very artifacts he'd been investigating. And then, the communication logs, encrypted messages, mostly short, coded instructions, but one particular thread stood out. A direct line of communication, originating from a secure server farm in the Caymans, leading directly to a private network within Thorne's estate. The content was chillingly clear, directives for the disposal of uncooperative elements, veiled references to legacy preservation, and specific instructions regarding the final disposition of the Finch collection. It was all there, a meticulous digital paper trail connecting Thorne to the illicit trade, the conspiracy of the Keepers, and the murder of Doctor. Then my breath hitched. The cold air of the data center suddenly felt like ice in my lungs. This wasn't just circumstantial, it was a blueprint. I leaned back, stretching the stiffness from my neck, the glowing monitors reflecting in my eyes. Thorne had built his empire on stolen history, and Dr. Finch had simply gotten too close to the keystone. The next step required precision, not brute force. I couldn't just call the local authorities. Thorne's influence ran too deep. I extracted the critical data, encrypting it onto a secure drive, then initiated a timed upload to a trusted journalistic contact, setting the release for 24 hours from now. I picked up my secure satellite phone. "I need an audience," I stated, my voice low and steady. "With Thorne, tonight, at his estate." The silence on the other end stretched. Then the security officer's voice, guarded, asked, "On what grounds, Seth?" "I have something he needs to see. Something that will either secure his legacy or shatter it." I knew Thorne's hubris. He wouldn't be able to resist. The bait was set. A few hours later, the wrought iron gates of Thorne's estate swung open with a slow, grinding groan, revealing the long, winding drive flanked by ancient oaks. The manor, a sprawling Gothic Revival structure, loomed under a bruised twilight sky, its windows like vacant eyes. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. This was it. No turning back. They frisked me with professional thoroughness, confiscating my phone and anything that could be construed as a weapon. I offered no resistance, my gaze sweeping the opulent foyer, noting the strategic placement of cameras, the heavy oak doors, the thick velvet drapes that muffled all sound. This place was a fortress, but I had brought my own siege engine. Thorne was waiting in his study, a cavernous room filled with leather-bound books and display cases housing what I now knew were stolen treasures. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his expression a mask of detached amusement. "Ta!" he greeted, his voice smooth, almost purring. "To what do I owe this rather dramatic visit?" I walked to the center of the room, stopping a respectful distance from the desk. "Dr. Finch's death was no accident, Thorne." His smile didn't waver. "A tragic fall. The coroner's report was quite clear." "The coroner's report was incomplete," I countered, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. "The unique trauma to his distal radius, the microscopic residue of an unknown adhesive on his shoe, the precise angle of impact against the balustrade, all indicative of a struggle, not a stumble." Thorne took a slow sip of his drink. "Forensic conjecture, Seth. You're a brilliant man, but prone to flights of fancy." I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out the secure drive. It was small, innocuous. "This isn't fancy, Thorne. This is data. Financial transactions, encrypted communications, detailed manifests of artifacts you've moved through the Keeper's network. It details the precise methods of acquisition, the routes of transport, and the final buyers. It even includes the specific instructions for dealing with uncooperative elements, a category Dr. Finch tragically found himself in." His eyes narrowed, losing their amusement. A flicker of something predatory sparked within them. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, Seth." "I was merely following the evidence," I said, holding his gaze. "The same evidence that implicates you directly in the murder of Dr. Finch and the systematic looting of archaeological sites for decades." Thorne set his glass down with a soft click. "And what do you propose to do with this evidence?" "It's already in motion," I stated, a calculated bluff mixed with truth. "A timed release to the world, unless you choose to cooperate." The heavy oak doors behind me clicked shut, then locked with a solid thud. "Thorn," I said, my voice unwavering, even as my internal clock screamed. "And the truth, unlike your carefully constructed lies, is immutable." The figures advanced, silent and swift. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the raw surge of adrenaline. The confrontation I had orchestrated had begun. This was no longer about data and dusty bones. It was about survival. The metallic tang of ozone still hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint, acrid scent of a discharged stun gun. The figures who had advanced on me now lay sprawled, subdued, their breathing ragged against the low hum of the servers. My own breath hitched, a sharp, cold intake that burned my lungs. The adrenaline, which had surged like a tide, now began its slow, painful ebb, leaving a tremor in my hands. The confrontation I had orchestrated had, against all odds, concluded. My gaze swept over the secured area. His earlier composure had evaporated, replaced by a raw, impotent fury. The arrival of the authorities I had tipped off was swift, a disciplined entry that secured the perimeter within minutes of the initial struggle. A colleague, the tactical operations chief, gave me a terse nod, his eyes assessing the scene with professional detachment. "Good work, Seth. You held them." "They had no choice but to show their hand," I replied, my voice raspy. My focus immediately shifted from the subdued figures to the true prize. I moved past the secured individuals, my gaze drawn to a reinforced cabinet, clearly distinct from the standard server racks. Each one represented a piece of the puzzle, a transaction, a link in the chain of illicit trade. "These," I stated, pointing to the cabinet, "are the keys to their entire operation. Digital ledgers, financial records, a network of the keepers themselves. It's all here." The lead detective, a woman with sharp, observant eyes, approached, a grim satisfaction playing on her features. "Our digital forensics team will have a field day. We already found encrypted files on the main server that corroborate your initial findings about the historian's death." I nodded, the weight of that confirmation settling heavy on my shoulders. The meticulous, anachronistic details I had found on the historian's remains, the subtle bone fractures, the unusual residue, had led me here. Within days, the scope of Thorn's empire began to unravel. The digital footprints led to a network of clandestine warehouses and private collections, revealing the vast scale of stolen artifacts. Ancient pottery, bronze tools, delicate papyrus scrolls, treasures plundered from historically significant sites, now recovered and awaiting repatriation. Each recovered artifact was a silent testament to the historian's pursuit of truth, a physical manifestation of the knowledge the keepers sought to control. The public exposure of the keepers was a seismic event. News reports detailed their centuries-old network, their manipulation of history, and the shocking revelation that they were responsible for countless disappearances and deaths, all in the name of preserving a fabricated narrative. The fury was palpable, a collective outrage that echoed my own. In the aftermath, the adrenaline faded entirely, replaced by a profound weariness. The psychological toll of the investigation began to manifest. The pursuit of truth, I realized, wasn't always clean or academic. Sometimes it demanded confrontation, demanded a willingness to stand in the path of danger. I had always believed in the objective power of science, the impartial judgment of evidence. But this case had shown me the human cost, the raw, brutal reality of what happens when that truth is suppressed. The precision of my forensic anthropology, the painstaking reconstruction of events from fragments of bone and soil had not just solved a crime, it had dismantled an entire legacy of deceit. My reflection in the window showed a man who looked older, perhaps, but also irrevocably changed. The comfortable confines of academia, the quiet satisfaction of scholarly pursuits, suddenly felt insufficient. There was a broader field, a more dangerous one, where the stakes were higher and the answers demanded more than just intellectual curiosity. The world was full of forgotten legacies, of truths buried under layers of power and deception. Someone had to dig them up. Someone had to face the figures who guarded those secrets. A new resolve solidified within me. The pursuit of justice through the lens of science was not merely my profession, it was becoming my purpose. This was just the beginning.